Good evening, everyone. If you're logged in from home and joining us, we're all remote tonight. Mr. Giuliano, are we ready to go?
We are all set.
Okay. Tonight is an interactive forum to talk about a grade level restructuring that we proposed to the Board of Education and some facilities opportunities we have that we discussed at the last board meeting. The forum is scheduled from 7 to 9 tonight. This session will be recorded for future viewing. It is also being streamed on YouTube. You will not notice board members assembled tonight. This is not a board meeting. This was constructed in a way to have the public actually ask questions. And normally, if you attend one of our board meetings for the good of the cause, you ask a question, but we normally don't respond. We take that information and we get back with you later. But this will be interactive, and I'll try to answer all your questions to the best of my ability. To expedite the process, we've disabled the chat feature so you can't chat among yourselves. You can, however, chat with the host, who's Mr. Giuliano, who's our board secretary and business administrator for the district. If you will chat or text him that you would like to ask a question, he'll put you in the queue, and then you can physically log it. You can physically unmute if you're muted and ask your question. And that way we'll kind of conduct it in a organized fashion, so we don't have a lot of people stacking up waiting to ask their question. In my communication to the community, I had asked that if you could take a look at the frequently asked questions we put on the website. I hope you had the opportunity to look at some of those. We do have some questions, though, that came up that we did not get on the FAQs. So I'd like to take a few minutes before we start with your questions to read these questions that have already been posted up to us. And that way I can answer those questions. They may be questions you already had planned to ask, or maybe it will prompt you to ask a different question. And I would just please ask, if someone's already asked the question, if we not repeat that we try to utilize the time to get as much information out for everybody as possible. And depending on how the end of the night goes, the board will take this information along with the recommendation I've made, and we are planning to present to them an option to take action on this this coming Thursday. So if I could, let me start off with some questions that we got that didn't get answered in the FAQ. We are the parents of a third grade child who has an IEP, and we're expecting him to remain in his smaller elementary school until 5th grade when we enrolled him in kindergarten. He currently receives support from the special education teachers and at a student-teacher ratio of 3-to-1. If all the elementary schools are now combined as 1/5 grade, what will be the special education student-teacher ratio, and how can you ensure us he will be provided with the same individualized attention that he's receiving now? And the answer is, we are mandated by federal law about the number of students who can be with a teacher depending on the program. The only option, the only modification to that is for us to apply for a waiver. Any of the programming that we're talking about tonight, grade level restructuring or facilities enhancements, would not have an impact on our special education program. And in fact, will give us an opportunity to expand and add higher quality to some of our special education programming and give opportunities for some of our children who are out of district placements to return to East Brunswick Public Schools and be around their peers. Next question is, what steps will be taken to prepare 4th graders during the school year to be ready to move to a larger school with many more students in their grade level, since they are losing a year of remaining in their smaller elementary schools? As we plan this, we know there's an impact to children. And there's actually been a recent question posed about, did the board consider the pandemic impact on this proposal? And we certainly did. We want to take steps to make sure that the transition for our students is as seamless as possible. And we if you didn't hear me mention at the last board meeting, fifth and sixth grade at Hammarskjold would really be considered an upper elementary school, not a middle school. One of the things that I've heard most frequently at East Brunswick, and this actually started with strategic planning, probably around the 2015-2016 school year, is parents were concerned about the transition from elementary schools to Hammarskjold. And they felt like that was a pretty big lift. So one of the features that we looked at when we started this proposal was to elongate that transition. And by having the fifth graders and sixth graders together at Hammarskjold, which is really designed around a house model, so you can actually take the students and you can compartmentalize them down into smaller groups. We thought that would pay big dividends in terms of the transition. Obviously, this proposal is being made because we are out of elementary classroom capacity. And it's not because of construction. It's because of migration to East Brunswick Public Schools. And we had a demographic study that was done, and it was revised in 2019 and updated, but it was updated before the pandemic. And what we found from the pandemic was that the migration to East Brunswick continues to accelerate. The opportunity to work from home has been offered to far more people, and people are looking for a residence that has a good school district, a good community, and East Brunswick has become attractive that way. So as far as the fourth graders go, we have a year of planning. This proposal is planned for September of 2022, not 2021. So 1 year from this coming September. And we would engage stakeholders to make sure that we had the transition for our fourth and fifth graders and those students who would be becoming seventh graders at Churchill to make it as seamless as possible. And one of the ways we can do that is to simply, we can replicate some of the things that students are actually receiving in terms of moving up ceremonies, activities at school. We can replicate those for 1 year of transition. So we don't look at this as an opportunity lost. We look at this as an opportunity for enhancement. The next question, after going through all the changes this past year with COVID-19 and now proposing this restructuring plan, this is a significant amount of change to put children through. Has any thought been put into how this will impact children currently attending East Brunswick Public Schools, and not just be based on the amount of children that will be entering the school system in the coming years? And of course, that is, we are always concerned. Students come first. They're my first priority. They're the first priority of every administrator in this district. We want to make sure that we support them. And we know that we're going to have to support students in a different way post-pandemic. There are going to be acknowledged learning gaps that we're going to have to remediate. We have social and emotional supports we're going to have to put out to schools. By having smaller class sizes, though, at our elementary schools, beginning with the 2022 school year, there is a greater opportunity to meet the needs of those students in those smaller settings in grades pre-K to 4 at the elementary schools than allowing the grades to creep up. And I know some people have said, well, the numbers work out that it's only going to be about maybe 1.5 to 2.5 students in a classroom. But when you're talking post-pandemic and you're talking about the supports that students need, you're talking about the personalized attention from our professional teachers who have been extremely dedicated through this entire process. I can't thank them enough. This would give us a greater opportunity to support all students in elementary school. Churchill is currently the most difficult school for students to navigate, as it does encompass the widespread footprint that was the Smith and Churchill schools. The students do not have time to utilize lockers, and most of the lockers in the 8th grade wing do not work. So students are forced to carry all their belongings, which is doubled for the athletes who are in season. With the addition of another 800 plus students, what's the plan to ensure safety and traffic flow in the school? I assume some of this will be alleviated by the block scheduling being implemented, which is wonderful in parentheses. But I have trouble envisioning how this will safely work with students racing from TCUs, which will increase the distance traveled by students across different parts of the school, as it appeared as they were being put on sports fields. So obviously there is a footprint of the temporary classroom units known as TCUs It's behind the north end of the Churchill complex. There is a ball field right there right now. We do not see the impact on any of our organized sports activities or organized sports teams. There may be an opportunity to look at inclusion of 7th grade into some activities, both school-wide and sports or athletics-wide, by placing the TCUs at Churchill. One of the things I want to emphasize is the name stands for exactly what they are. They are temporary classroom units. They are not designed as permanent structures, and they are not designed to stay there. So this is not, we're going to put trailers there and we're going to walk away from this and they're just going to stand there for years and years. We have to have a plan to replace those temporary classrooms with permanent structures. To the point that we can, given the fact that we would have 7th, 8th, and 9th graders in the same building, we would attempt to compartmentalize the students as much as possible. There will be migration around the building for the performing arts, for the for music, for lunch, physical education, and a variety of other things that we know we have to have certain spaces for. Science labs, for example, it probably would not make sense to replicate those in portable classrooms. So science labs would be moved to a certain science class or a lab. But we think there's an opportunity to minimize the traffic. And I know from my experience of being at Churchill during back to school nights, I watch parents navigate their child's schedule from the north end to the south end of the building. And that's what we want to try to alleviate, even with this, by adding additional students on the footprint, is to alleviate the not only interaction among grades, but also to minimize the amount of student traffic within the building. Security, we have vetted that at a first degree, and the temporary classroom units would be secured by fence, so there wouldn't be an opportunity to get in. We would have security based out there as well. So everything that you would normally see in our school would be replicated in temporary classroom units, including the look of the classrooms. The classrooms are very appealing, and we've had some slides we put up on what the classrooms could look like. And if you didn't know you were in a temporary classroom unit, other than the materials they're made of, you probably wouldn't know that it was a temporary structure. Once 7th graders are moved to Churchill, where their scheduling includes some elective choices that the 8th graders have to allow for more time, or same elective choices as 8th graders, to allow for a more true middle school feel versus the limited selections at Hammersville Middle School. And the answer is yes, that opportunity exists to look at a greater number of electives for 7th graders and greater opportunities for 7th graders to navigate an enhanced curriculum. We've been looking at what those opportunities could be. So stay tuned in the near future. We may have a presentation to the board about some ideas that we've been talking about. As someone who was a student at East Brunswick High School during the last major reconstruction in 2000, 2001, it quite honestly was miserable for us who had a constant construction disruptions, but graduated before seeing the benefits of the building. Since my daughter is a current 5th grader, I fear she is not only the most affected by the restructuring, but she will also endure constant construction disruptions while at the high school. When will phase 2 timeline for building the new high school be shared? And that's really up to the community. Part of the takeaway tonight is to get feedback from members of the community here, those of you who've taken your time to come out, and find out what you think about a new high school. I have been out in the community for a number of years talking about this. We've been talking about the potential for either modification to the high school or replacing the high school since 2017. Depending on who you talk to, people have different perspectives on that. What I will tell you is if you have a child in elementary school right now, depending on what the community's desires are, we could press forward with a schedule that could be aggressive, but we have certain timelines. And there's another question that's asked along these lines that answers that more clearly. That question is, at the last board meeting, Mr. Winston stated that the first students impacted by the restructuring would be the first to benefit with the new high school. Since current fifth graders are the first to have their high school, middle school experience cut short, does this mean the high school will be completed for them to attend in the next 4 or 5 years? So again, depending on the community, what is the pleasure of the community? And obviously the Board of Education would have to vote to pursue a new high school and at what scope. And they would have to authorize a proposal for a referendum. But under the most aggressive schedule, assuming that all of that was to move forward, this next school year, the 21-22 school year, would have to be a stakeholder group formation for input and support for a referendum. And then we would need board approval for all of that. So this would be a committee work, an ad hoc committee, if the board chose to do that, and then make a recommendation to the Board of Education. The Board of Education would have to make approval for a referendum and what the scope of any new construction would be. In the 22-23 school year, temporary classroom units would go at Churchill, starting that school year in September. And sometime during that school year, again, 22-23 would be a referendum for the new high school and any other associated facility improvements. And along with the rest of that year would be design and planning if the referendum passes. If the referendum fails, we have, I believe, 5 opportunities in a school year to hold a referendum. So if we fail, we would have to go back if the community or the board decided that we wanted to do. But assuming it passes, then we go 2023 to 24, again, more planning. And in that year, 2023-24, construction could begin on a new high school, with construction continuing for the 24-25 school year, and opening a new high school as early as the 25-26 school year. That is aggressive. And that's assuming everything else falls into place. That's state approvals, financing, bidding, successful contractor, successful weather. And there are a lot of variables there, but that's a reasonable but aggressive schedule. Next question, in the junior high school, will a 7th grader be able to have a class with a 9th grader, and what classes will it be? Well, we don't know yet. There might be that opportunity, but we haven't formulated the schedule yet. But that's something we would do over this next year. At the last board meeting held 2 weeks ago, Superintendent Victor Valesky mentioned this has been in discussion since 2017. Wasn't the growth of the population in EB due to new construction taken into consideration and when the construction started? And knowing that there would be growth, it was inevitable that more room would be needed for schools. So why is there a rush now to displace these children in a manner in such short notice, especially after dealing with the year they had with COVID? And again, we are talking about 1 year from September, and I understand the parents' passion about recovery from the pandemic. The reason for the proposal to the board was we will run into a situation that we will cross this threshold, and parents at elementary schools will be extremely unhappy by the rising class sizes. And the reason I know that is a high probability, our demographic study said we would grow by 2024, and roughly a little over 400 students. But what we've seen in the last probably 6 months in our registration department, which is housed in the administration office. So we see the people coming in, and Karen Mandler, who assists me, heads up that department. We have seen a lot of students coming in to register. In fact, since September of the school year, if you didn't hear me say at the board meeting, we have 331 new students have registered, and 64 students who have been previously inactive who may have gone to private schools and have re-entered our schools. And then we also have 110 students who have pre-registered for kindergarten, 27 have pre-registered for ELA, and we have another 50 registration applications that are currently going through. So we have a total of the potential of 77 ELA students and 110 kindergarten students on top of nearly 400 other students that we've entered into our system. Now, in all honesty, we lost about 200 students at the beginning of the pandemic who went out to private schools. but some of those students are already beginning to return. And by the way, the growth is something that we are aware of. There hasn't been substantial growth in terms of construction. The last major impact to us was Kensington Place, the apartment complex behind Walmart. It yielded so far about 70 students out of the entire complex. And we were able to absorb those students at that time into our elementary schools. And primarily those students came in at grades K to 3, but we had some others in other grades, but that was the primary impact. It was mentioned again by Superintendent Valesky, the number in growth were elementary school students. So why isn't there more concentration in expanding the high school and not expanding or building a new elementary school where the grade is need, or where the need is greater, I'm sorry. So to build a new elementary school, we would need land. We actually spent an entire year looking for land in East Brunswick, and there's no land to be had. We have the land is all locked up either in protected categories or is not available. So we're looking at our existing spaces. And after a number of variations and discussions with the board, it made more sense to build the capacity in our elementary schools and then be able to add these components to, like for Churchill, and then to eventually move the 9th grade to the high school in a comprehensive high school setting. I think one important thing to mention is we have interviewed students, we've interviewed community members, we talked about it at our strategic planning meetings many years ago. And even back then, there was a desire, if we were going to look at a new high school, to build a comprehensive 9 through 12 high school. And students overwhelmingly have suggested that they would have preferred a comprehensive high school experience. And Dr. Vanell and his team had interviews with students over the years, and that's been consistently reported about having that 9th through 12th grade experience. It is factual that some elementary schools have room to add on more students, as it's been evaluated and calculated accordingly. I'm not sure where that information comes from because I have the facts and I can tell you we're at capacity. Those students may not physically be in the classrooms right now because they have chosen to stay remote, but they're registered to be in the classes come September. And we have run the numbers by every class. Phase 1 is supposed to happen the beginning of this school year. No, not this school year. It's supposed to happen September of 2022, not 2021. So beginning September 2022. Phase 1 is changing the grade locations and holding classes in trailers, or only certain classes being held in trailers, or teachers going to have to teach full classes in these trailers. How many children will these trailers safely and comfortably accommodate? Just as many, they'd be classroom size modules, just like we have in our schools. So the same class size as you would see in a typical Churchill classroom. And teachers would be assigned to those classrooms. They would not be empty classrooms that they would just migrate to with the students. So they would be those teachers' classrooms. We haven't decided yet which grade might be housed in the temporary classroom units. And how long is phase 1 supposed to last? It could be a number of years. We don't have an exact date, but it could be probably at least 5 years. Phase 2 was mentioned, but no proposed date of this phase beginning was discussed. When is phase 2 expected to begin talks and actually take place? That depends on the community. That depends on what the community wants. And what are the expectations of phase 1 in order to begin phase 2? Obviously, we have to immediately address the elementary classroom space issue. In the temporary classroom units, we have to begin planning for that. That is a longer term process than a lot of people imagine. We are all recovering from a pandemic in the construction industry as well. So these are not temporary classroom units that we can simply go and pick out and say, deliver those to East Brunswick. They have to be designed, they have to be delivered, and they have to be set up with utilities and foundations inspected and meet all the criteria the township has. So that's why the lead time until September. Actually, we'd have to have them in place probably by the end of July, beginning of August, to adequately prepare for students to arrive in September. And this isn't just talk. Tonight's talk, but I want to get feedback from you. If TCUs are being built on the fields, will any current sports teams at the junior high school not have a season? No, they wouldn't be impacted. Again, how long might this change expect to last? About 5 years. Would 5th and 6th grade schedules be similar in terms of classes and electives? That is to be decided yet, but we would have opportunities to make the 5th grade experience and the 6th grade experience different than what parents know it today, and have a greater impact on their student, have a better experience for their students too. How does this change affect staff? How many staff members will likely be moved, building grade levels? Teachers would move with the grades. Simple equation is teachers would move with the grades, and as we build out at the elementary schools extra sections, we would have to hire more teachers to fill those sections. 4th graders next year in their move to Hammersholt as a 5th grader, they'd miss out on 5th grade experiences. So we would replicate that. We would make this transition as seamless as possible, as I said earlier. And we can replicate anything. We're East Brunswick. We can do anything. We can make that happen. And we can make sure that transition is as seamless as possible. Class sizes, how will class sizes be affected? Will they decrease or remain the same, or not just get bigger? We want to maintain legitimate class sizes. We want to have smaller class sizes if we can, but if we have to grow, we will grow a little bit, but we do not want to put 25, 26, 27, 28 students in a classroom. We want to have those numbers lower and be able to have the room to accommodate them for a great education, a great experience, no matter which building they're in. And again, what's the timeline of the high school? And so that I already answered that question. So those are the questions that were out there that hadn't been answered on the frequently asked questions. So now I'm going to open it up to all of you. So once again, if you could let Mr. Giuliano know, he's the host of this meeting tonight, that you'd like to ask a question, then he'll put you in the queue to go ahead and ask it.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I ask, please do not text me your question. Just let me know that you'd like to ask a question, and I'll call on you and you can ask your question live. Okay, we have Sharon Kaplan.
Hi.
Hi there, Dr. Plesky. Just to introduce myself, I'm actually a teacher in North Brunswick, where we just went through moving our elementary schools pre-K to 4 when we built a new school and restructured this year.
Okay.
The plan had been in place for a very long time. We went through the referendum. I've been a teacher there for more than 20 years, so I've been through many referendums in North Brunswick. My children are in 3rd and 5th grade.
Okay.
And my question actually is not coming as much from a parent as it is by a teacher. Will the 5th grade teachers need to become content specific certified if they're going to an upper grade or upper elementary?
I don't have the full answer for you tonight. I don't know. There might be some issues we have to address there, but we don't see this as a big showstopper. I think that we have, when we're talking about the upper elementary, 5th and 6th grade, I don't think that'll be a major issue, but I don't want to say that we have everything resolved, because we don't.
Okay. That basically leads to what my overall concern is, which is that this feels very rushed. It really does feel as though 1 year is not enough planning. When you're saying we have next year to plan that, we don't know yet, we need to plan that. Next year, in my opinion, shouldn't necessarily be on all of these innovative things that we need to change, but yet going back to the normalcy that we need to recover from the pandemic. If this were a 2-year plan instead of a 1-year plan, I think I could breathe a little bit easier. So my next question actually becomes, is there a plan in place to work with these children next year, which we don't even know what the school year is going to look like? Again, I'm a teacher, so I'm again trying to think as both a teacher and a mom, but is there a plan to help the children both transition back to school as normal, like with lunches and possibly masks and staggered whatever needs to happen, but then also, hey, you're in 4th grade, see ya, you're no longer in elementary school, this is your big year as you're also trying to transition. Or, oh, you're going to Hammersholt for 1 year, and then you're going to move on to a whole new school? Like, is there a plan for the third and fifth graders?
Yes, there is a plan. And our primary focus is, and you make a good point about the recovery from the pandemic. There are things that I cannot answer tonight because we don't understand the full impact to some of our students. We have students who wanted to be in our virtual or a hybrid setting early on. We had some students come back, in 5 day a week, and some have chosen to remain virtual and will remain virtual all this year, just as I'm sure you experience as a teacher in North Brunswick. And your superintendent and I talk all the time about, we have similar dynamics that are occurring in our districts. The first plan is the recovery from the pandemic and making sure that we address all of the needs of all the students. I believe that our students are more resilient than we give them credit for, but I also understand there are things that I cannot forecast right now. I can tell you from my walks around schools and seeing students how engaged the ones who have come back to school and their parents feel comfortable sending them back, how they've adapted so quickly to coming back into the classroom, and how our teachers have adapted so quickly to having those students back in their classroom. So I know there's going to be a transition back, but I say once again, what my fear is we're having not only what our demographer had said to us before the pandemic about get ready, East Brunswick is about to encounter a pretty significant increase in enrollment over this next 4 or 5 years. And then everything was upended by the pandemic and everybody stayed put. But like I said, what we're seeing is this pretty aggressive migration and the exchange of houses. Houses are being sold pretty quickly. And that's where we're seeing our new students enroll. So like I said, the first focus is on the wellness of students. We've already got programs in place. We've already been engaging in that work to prepare for that. And we've already been engaging with students, even in this pandemic environment, to begin to assess needs. But there's going to be an academic assessment required at the beginning of the school year to determine where every child is.
Do you mind if I ask another question? I'm sorry, I'm still unmuted.
Because we probably have other people that want to ask.
Exactly. Just with that, I mean, the health and wellness is absolutely overwhelmingly important. But at the same time, I really am afraid for the academic levels of where these children are, which again is why I'm so nervous about this move taking place after just 1 year back. Just to give you a framework, I teach kindergarten and I am in May teaching children how to write their names because they had been virtual all the way through. Their families had chosen to stay virtual all the way through. April 19th was one of our transitions back. And those children came back on April 19th. And I promise you, it was the first time some of them had held a pencil or crayon. And it broke my heart. And they're not the only children. There are children in all schools, in all demographics, when they're in front of a computer and learning to type like this instead of that. And I guess my question is, with the academic needs also there, wouldn't it make sense to have even more time to transition, give those children another year in elementary school as that setting?
Well, I don't want to debate the fact that, more time, if you have more time to do anything, in some cases that's better. But the problem is we are running out of time. We're running out of time. And I guess what I need to say to the entire group is if we don't address this situation in a systematic manner, this is in spite of the pandemic, when your children get to the high school, you're probably going to be unhappy. Because we have to do something, not only to address the space issues at our elementary school, but we have to do something with the infrastructure needs of the high school. All of our buildings have been air conditioned with the exception of the high school. And parts of the high school are air conditioned, but many parts remain unair conditioned. And some of the equipment is so aged that our maintenance department, they do a great job, but they can't even get parts for some of the equipment that we currently have installed. So now it becomes a question of, do we replace that piece of equipment? And usually that's what we have to do. We have to replace the entire piece of equipment. And for you as taxpayers, that's going to become a factor that is going to be an impact. Do you want to keep investing in an older building that will need constant attention and may not be the high school you'd always want to have, Or should we have invested years ago? And why didn't somebody bring this up? And why didn't we address it a long time ago? But I understand the impact of the pandemic, and I can't negate that. And that is certainly the X factor in this whole equation, because we do not know, and I can't say with all sincerity what we will know that children will come back with as they begin to return to face-to-face full-time instruction in September of 2021.
Next in the queue is Stacey Alfonso.
Talking.
Hi.
Hi. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm good. Thank you. So my name is Stacey Alfonso. I have 3 kids in the public schools. Happy to have my kids here. You guys are great. Couldn't be more thrilled with everything, but I do have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So my first question is, recess is mandated in the state of New Jersey, and it is up to 5th grade. So they are supposed to have 20 minutes of recess. And How will that be addressed if the 5th graders are at Hammersholt without an apparatus? Or maybe, I don't know, maybe there is the place, but not a playground type thing.
Yeah.
Is there a plan for that?
We have a space. There's actually a field up adjacent to at the back end of the parking lot. It's seldom used. It's more of a intramural type field, but that would be the space that we would look at. We do have a small playground for our Early Learning Academy folks that are based at Hammersholt, but it is really a primary, aged apparatus. But that's what we're looking at, is the space, the play space up above. And if you drive into Hammersholt, you probably wouldn't even notice it, but it's off to the right up above. Yeah.
Okay, and I guess they would have to build that into the schedule.
Sure.
And things like that. Okay, and then just one more question, because you did answer some. When you were talking about the high school and how it has to go through many phases, so I'm a teacher also. I teach kindergarten also.
Yeah, I know.
We've talked, but East Brunswick is a great town, and I know that we probably would have a lot of support, but what if it gets not passed so many times, and then it's we're just at a standstill? I know you can't predict the future, but that worries me. I would be more on board to say, okay, I have a third and a fourth grader right now. The idea of a new high school or a better high school is very enticing, but how these things go. And so I'm not trying to be negative, and I would be out there campaigning in any way that I could help for a yes vote. But when it does come down as a no, are we going to be stuck with these these TCUs and this plan not moving forward?
No. So what we would do is, if we have to have a contingency, anytime you go to referendum, you have to understand there's potential that you're not going to pass. And so that's why, we need to do the work ahead of time. We need to engage stakeholders. We need to get feedback from the community about what it is that you want to see. What do you expect to have for your children if they're in the system and they could potentially be the first occupants of that new building? What would you want their experience to be like? And let's take this to another level. What if you were the parent, as one of them articulately said, my children heard the construction noise but never got to see the finished product? Then somebody will say, what's in it for me then? And what I will say to them is, there's something in it for everyone, because right now, I'm sure all of you on this screen have noticed, if you're a homeowner, you've noticed what the value of your home has been like over the last 6 months, over the last year. If you're somebody looking for a home, you know the pain of trying to secure a home, of trying to make that offer on that home when it gets pulled off by somebody who's making an offer well over asking price. And having a new high school in this community, I think, would put a premium stamp on East Brunswick properties, even past the pandemic, because you put our top-notch education, our top-notch teachers, and then you put a state-of-the-art high school on top of that that's a comprehensive 9 through 12 high school, and you're going to be a community that everyone wants to be in.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next in the queue is Denise Bergamoto.
Hi.
Hi, Dr. Volaski. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good. I just have a quick question, and I just wanted to know your thoughts. I have a 3rd grader and a 9th grader, and I think again, the teachers are doing a wonderful job. I'm not concerned about my 9th grader. She's doing fine. My concern, and I just want to know your thoughts, not really concern, putting potential 7th graders with 9th graders. I mean, I know my daughter, 15, and the kids with 11-year-olds or 12-year-olds. I mean, I know the maturity level of seeing high school kids and kind of sometimes the dynamic, sometimes, you know, the interactions of high school versus 7th grade.
Right.
What are you thinking? I know you said they may interact, they may not. I just wouldn't want a 7th grader to feel nervous to be around a 9th grader.
Our intent is really to have the 7th graders experience that opportunity more as a group of 7th graders, and the 8th graders and 9th graders, while they're there, they would probably have more interaction with each other. But the 7th graders, it is a transition year. And I'm saying this, and I'm not a social scientist, and I don't hold a certification in the social sciences, but I'm an observer. And, you know, having been in schools for my entire career and observing what's going on in a variety of schools, the differentiation in age between a kindergartner and a 5th grade is pretty significant. And then the 7th grade, yeah, that's a different year too. It's transition. But that gap between 7 and 9 is not so significant in age, but there is maturity differences.
Right.
And so that's why, you know, in an ideal situation, the 9th graders would become part of the high school environment. Absolutely. And by the way, we did look at, and now this was from a top level perspective, and looking at the temporary classroom units and could they fit at the high school versus at Churchill? Would it make more sense to do that? And we looked at this through the lens of the taxpayers of East Brunswick. Where would be the most economical impact? And realizing too, this is a temporary measure. And by far, by a significant level, the cost to install temporary classroom units at Churchill is far less than it is at the high school. And one of the biggest driving factors is utilities. At Churchill, we would not have to connect to existing utilities. We could essentially have a self-contained treatment system for the restrooms at Churchill that would be pumped out, you know, on a routine basis. But at the high school, they have to be connected to the utilities of the high school, which involves major infrastructure, tear up, repair, replacement, roadway replacement. And then if the community said, we're ready to build a new high school, then, you know, now you want to go, I hope we put those temporary classroom units in a place they don't need to build on, because if we do, we've just created a big problem. Right. So that's one of the reasons to stay away, as well as the cost factor and the impact. But I know some people have asked that question, why not just move the 9th graders to the high school?
Absolutely.
But it became an economic factor in the temporary measure that we're proposing to the community.
Okay. Thank you. I'm all for the bigger high school. I'm all for putting them back.
Okay. You're gonna be on a committee then.
Good. I'm all for it.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next in the queue is Kimberly Halley.
Hi.
Hi, Mr. Velasky. My question is just one simple question. My son is currently in preschool.
Okay.
And he would be transitioning not next year, the following year, to a different school, I guess, because he's in special education. Okay. So would that redistricting start the second year in this transition, or would he still be slated to go to the school he's currently going to?
I think he would still be slated to the school he's going to. We're not talking about massive redistricting. We're just talking about moving a grade out. Mm-hmm. There would have to be some adjustments. Just without being able to put the map up to show you, mm-hmm. we have looked at the attendance areas for every single school in East Brunswick, every elementary school. And there are these little pockets, little narrow tangents and little developments that were built many years ago. Yeah. Where, you know, you might be able to look across the street and see Warnsdorfer, but your children go to Central. Yes. And so those kind of anomalies have occurred throughout the district over a number of years, and it's just creeped. So we're talking about some minor adjustment for some of the students. And we're also talking about, in terms of doing that, having those, being able to do that is a soft transition for those students in terms of the enrollment areas that we're talking about.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much. That was it.
Okay. Next person in the queue is Afsana Aziz.
Hi.
Hello, Dr. Velasquez.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
I have 3 children in East Brunswick system. I have 2 fifth graders and a 7th grader.
Okay.
I am mostly worried about earlier school starting time for my 2 fifth graders who will be starting at 7:26, I believe, as a 7th grader. And I'm anyway worried about earlier school time. And I know that most studies show that sleep is optimal for that age group. And I'm worried that my kids will have to start that earlier school time even a year earlier. So my question really is that, is there any thought of 7th graders starting the school at the time that they start at Hammershoal rather than following the middle Churchill and high school schedule?
So I'm so glad you brought this question up. We actually looked in terms of later start times for students, those that are in our secondary schools, those that are in Hammershoal, Churchill, and the high school right now. And we've been talking about later start times, and the board's been talking about later start times for a number of years, probably back to 2015. And we just couldn't make it work. But actually if we were to do this redistricting, the opportunity to legitimately explore later start time exists. And I know that some people are going to shake their heads, but we actually believe that we can build a greater level of efficiency in our transportation system by this reconfiguration and actually pull off that later start time. Because one of the factors driving later start time was to do that in our current situation was to add more buses, more routes. And when you start doing that and you start putting more traffic on the road, then route distances start to get elongated too. But when we looked at this was one of the tangible benefits of this grade level reconfiguration, that we could legitimately explore that. I can't say tonight that with all sincerity we'd be able to pull it off, but I am optimistic that we would be able to have later start times for our secondary students at some point in this transition.
Does that mean that my 7th graders will be able to enjoy that, or it's something that you will be able to implement later?
I'm going to say that we would be able to explore it over this next year, and it is a possibility. I would not guarantee it, but it is certainly something that's been part of the whole comprehensive look that we've been doing in terms of grade restructuring and looking at the high school, that later start times, if we could make that a component of this would be a definite factor for our community and for our students that would be a benefit to them.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I guess one other thing is with the same question really. So then potentially 7th, 8th, and 9th graders will start the school in a later time, possibly after 8 o'clock or around 8 o'clock. Is that what we are looking at? Because
I would tell you that we would not be able to get past any proposal that we would have would probably not be past 8 o'clock. About a half an hour swing is about all that we have to move. So I don't want to, I don't want people to feel like, this could be later than 8 o'clock. 7:26 sliding to 8 o'clock would be about the greatest movement we could get. If we were able to pull it off, it would be about a half an hour swing.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Next in the queue is Lakshmi Chamarthi.
Hello, Dr. Velasquez.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
Good.
Okay, my kid is in 3rd grade, and I am very happy to be part of East Brunswick. And I actually kind of participating in such kind of meetings for the first time, and I see how you are taking care of all our concerns. I really appreciate that. So having said that, so my concern is about, so my son is in 3rd grade, so he will be in the first batch who will be taking this transition.
Right.
But in elementary school, being in the 5th grade, I think there are a lot of opportunities to be the seniors in the elementary school, and also a lot of experiences being the seniors, and also trying to be the mentors for the younger students, like 2nd graders to 3rd graders, when they get chance to, or doing some projects, being their mentors. So how, and because of this transition, I think they'll be missing all this, including the graduation part from the 5th grade, from the elementary transition to middle school. So how is this going to be addressed?
We would take a look at, the activities, the symbolic activities that our 5th graders go through right now, and we would make the attempt to replicate those for them, so they didn't miss out on that experience. In terms of your mention about mentoring younger students, we could even, push that down to have that start with 4th graders begin to have those types of interactions with students. 4th grade is when students begin to change. That's the first time they begin to change classes. So, and I understand that when we make this move, there are going to be, in the first year of the transition, it's going to be an impact on certain students in this first phase. But as we get settled, we have the opportunity in 5th grade to make that an entirely different experience than what our students have right now, in terms of just how they feel about their 5th grade experience. The school, the teachers, it gives us unlimited, well, not unlimited, but it gives us far more opportunity to explore what 5th grade could look like. And as I said earlier, we are looking at this as an elongation of the transition, having 5th and 6th grade together in Hammersholt as the upper elementary students. That allows for that transition and not that abruptness from 5th grade to 6th grade that a lot of people report. And some students do quite well. Some students are well prepared to move up to Hammersholt and have no problems in the transitions through all of our schools. But we're not talking about adding any more transitions to our system. So we would, in terms of a student's career, they have the same number of transitions that would just occur at a different grade. But we would work very hard to make sure that students have, not only at 4th grade, which would be their last year of elementary school, to make that symbolic, to do something for our 5th graders, to do something for the 6th graders that are there, and then move on up to Churchill. So we're very passionate about replicating that, or doing something new and significant that would be meaningful to the students and their families.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next is Melanie Pope.
Hello.
I'm sorry. Good evening, Dr. Valesky and everyone. My daughter is a 3rd grade student at Chittick Elementary School, and I'm trying to understand the transition and what we're preparing for these children that next year, which would be actually this year, September 2021, going into 22, being the 4th grade. So she would be graduating with the 5th grade. And you had mentioned a little earlier that discussions have been made, or this is being addressed with them already. And we're already in May, and they're ending in the middle of June. And as far as I know, my daughter's not aware of this at all, because I haven't even discussed it with her, hoping that this would change. So I don't know. First of all, we're preparing for 2 graduations because it'll be 4th grade, 5th grade graduation next year. What are we doing to prepare these 3rd graders that 4th grade is going to be their last year, thinking that they have 2 more years?
Well, I believe that's once the board makes a decision to, what their choice is to move forward with this recommendation, then we begin having conversations at the school level and with parents and with PTAs about what that looks like for students.
So that'll be already when they're in 4th grade. It wouldn't even be now preparing them that next year maybe is going to be your last year in the school. It'll happen in 4th grade when they're there in September.
Realistically, yes. Over the summer, we'll work on it. But as far as the students' understanding of that, They would know before the end of this year, but as we wrap up this school year, we certainly have a lot of things we have to do to complete this year. And then, get ready for the opening in September. And then that's giving us one full year to prepare the students for what the end of next year would look like.
I have another quick question. I thought TCUs were only allowed 5 years. You had mentioned that it could be up to 5 years.
I mentioned 5 years. We have to have a plan in place. And if, say, for example, the community doesn't support a referendum, or we can't get support to construct a permanent structure, we would have to get permission to extend those out for whatever period of time until we could construct the new replacement for the TCUs.
And who's voting on this? Is it just the board, or
Yes.
does the community have? So the board votes, but it's up to us on how long this would be? I don't understand that.
No. So what the board would vote on, are you asking about the construction part of this? Is that
No, more asking, I guess maybe I'm confused on, you're saying that the board votes on if we're going to move forward with this transition.
Right. So that's one vote. They would vote if they are going to support the grade reconfiguration and the placement of the temporary classroom units at Churchill. And then after that, I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But then it's up to us how long it may take, even if we don't want this right now.
Well, no, it would be, so the community would have to be asked the question about a referendum to replace the TCUs or a high school. Now, we would work very hard to work with the township, because there might be opportunities in terms of different grant fundings or things like that to support part of a construction. But we envision there's going to have to be a referendum to replace the temporary classroom units with a permanent structure, that we would not be able to fund that through the normal proceeds of the district. One of the other things I wanted to make everyone on this forum aware of, like everyone else, been watching what's been happening since the transition to the new administration, and President Biden has not been shy about borrowing money to put into resources for social reform or for support for the COVID relief. And he talked about an infrastructure plan, and obviously that isn't formalized yet. But over the next 3 years, he may get support for the passage of an infrastructure plan that may push money down to state governments. And if that money were to flow to New Jersey, and whoever is a successful candidate for governor at that time decides to make that available for grants for schools to either replace, repair, refurbish school facilities, I want this board, this community, to be in a position to say, yes, we want to be part of that. And part of this planning is to prepare us for that opportunity should it exist. And it may not happen, but I want this community to be in a position to say, yes, we're interested, or no, we're not interested. I don't want this board, or whoever is on the board at that time, to be in a position to feel like we didn't do the planning and we weren't prepared to even say we wanted it. We missed this opportunity. So that's what part of this discussion is about. And I understand. I've heard from so many parents that are, they don't want this for their elementary children because of the impact of the ceremonial part, the moving up ceremonies. But I promise you, we can replicate that. We can do that. But we can create better opportunities for our 5th and 6th graders, and even our 7th graders at Churchill, by looking at this in a new way. And I think it's exciting. And I think having parents involved in part of that discussion is important. If the board decides to move this process forward, we'll be spending time with the community next year, talking to you about your feelings and about, what you would like to see, and about soliciting support if the community chooses to do that and the board supports it, about moving forward with the planning for a new high school.
I'm still confused on why a high school and not elementary. And you mentioned that there's no land. I don't know why we can't build on current buildings. I know that time constraints may affect, because really, when do we have open opportunities to build on top of current elementary schools that are standing? But you're talking about the growth in the elementary and the lower grades, but we're talking about building onto the high school. And it's these elementary school students that are growing, are learning, are sensitive. I don't want to take for granted that high school students are young adults, but they are. And everybody, again, and I just want to add, as per Sharon Kaplan's statement, I do agree with her. I think after COVID, I mean, at least give us another year, at least one more year before this is done. Let the children adjust. And you said that they're resilient. I appreciate your positive attitude on it. And we want to be positive about it as well, because yes, we want to see something better for our community in East Brunswick. But this is not something that came out of the blue, because my husband went and he was in a TCU when he graduated in '88. And I know another person who in 2002. And this is not something that came up out of the blue, that high school needed to be grown. But all the school systems in East Brunswick needs to grow. Honestly, and I know I'm getting emotional about it, I wish you would wait and consider another year at least. At least another year after the year that we had. And it really concerns me. Children that are resilient, and you see that they're transitioning back, I really think they're probably the hybrid students that were going in sometimes and not going in. But what about the ones that were totally virtual and finally are going in? They're only in for a couple of months.
Right.
And then school year is cut in the middle of June, which is earlier than usual. I'm pleading, and I appreciate you planning this meeting this evening and listening to us. But I really wish the board would consider another year and really, really see what this affects on all of us, the parents and the children, because we're very concerned about this.
One of the things I would like to share with you, I was in a couple of classrooms the first week and the second week. And I was in one classroom where the teacher said, some of us have been here in hybrid, some of us, came back and then went back out again, and some are, here new for the first time. And the really great part of this story is I couldn't identify the students when I walked in the classroom. They were all engaged. They were all doing, they looked like they had been there for quite some time, and they acclimated so well. And but they were three distinct groups. But I'm not negating the emotion that's tied to this, and I certainly am not trying to diminish that. But Mr. Giuliano, we have the opportunity to put up, just for the group, so they could all see what the TCUs might look like?
Yes. Just give me one moment.
I think that might be helpful for you to see what the interior of these facilities look like. And this is not, as you can see, the top left photo, that resembles just about any computer media center we have in the district. And then down the lower right, the classroom setting. And this would be an enclosed module. So ours would have the interior classrooms as you see in the center lower, not necessarily with lockers, but it would be an enclosed hallway for security. But these they're state of the art, and we would not buy cheap, and we would not, this wouldn't be something that was a compromise for our students. These would satisfy the need, but they are, by their very nature and by their name, temporary and designed to be replaced by a permanent structure. So I also don't want to negate the fact that we would have to endorse the support of the community and the Board of Education on what the replacement of those TCUs would look like as a permanent addition.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, next in the queue is Jorge Medina.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening, Dr. Valesky.
Thanks.
So Melanie asked a question and you answered it, so I'm gonna go on to my second question. So we have other districts that have neighboring, basically they rent out neighboring, space for pre-K and ELA classes. So I was suggesting, instead of moving the fifth graders, if we could find some space somewhere in East Brunswick or in the neighboring neighborhoods to see if we get that space rented out for just the ELA and pre-K class, and we could utilize that space for the fifth graders.
Okay. We did. I will tell you, we did look at, and this was before the pandemic. I'm not gonna, we did not go shopping for space during the pandemic. Obviously, we were all pretty busy, including all of you as family members supporting your children.
Right.
But we did, before that, we did look. We looked at properties, and we had been in touch with the township, and we were actually, kind of bird dogging a number of properties that were being vacated that we were seeing throughout the township. And usually what we found, in fact, in every case, they were tied up behind the scenes in some form of litigation, or, there were multiple owners. So we had a lot of complex situations. So nothing clean that came forward that, was within the parameters of East Brunswick and our attendance areas, and without a lot of complexity. And in terms of security and, all the things that we normally put into our buildings, that really presented itself that would be acceptable to our students before the pandemic. So I will tell you that we did not do any shopping during the pandemic, but thank you for the suggestion.
No problem. I appreciate it. That was it. And I agree with Melanie. I think if we could hold off another year, that will be great. Because I told the bear news with my daughter, and she's not too happy about it.
Okay.
And she's a third grader now. She'd be going on fourth, and I told her this might be your last year.
Okay.
So if it's possible, if any power, we could hold off for another year, that'll be great.
Okay. Thank you for your feedback.
No problem.
Okay, next in the queue is Agnes Lazar.
Hello.
I apologize. Good evening. Good evening. I just had to switch out of the room I was in. I apologize for that.
How are you?
Good evening. I apologize. I was putting the kids to bed while doing this, so I apologize.
Double duty.
But speaking of them, my thought about this plan, Dr. Valesky and everyone, I just wanted to ask, what is the long-term plan? We make these shifts, we make these adjustments, let's say, so 2020 to 2023. The proposal is a 5-year proposal. Is there then, looking at our numbers, looking at everything, does everything switch back, or once we make this switch, this is what the switch will be?
I think the plan needs to, in order for us to grow the space that we need for the intermediate, when I call the intermediate future, I'm talking about to the end of the demographer study, which was slated for 2024. And as I said earlier, one of the things the pandemic provided for us was this extra complexity in terms of the impact to our students, impact to their families, impact to our teachers, impact to the entire community. And we know that there have been financial impacts, social emotional impacts, academic impacts. But we also knew that these children were going to continue to come. And what was really the aha moment was when we started to see the acceleration of these enrollments in our elementary schools. So I think long-term, what we need to do is we need to have capacity in our elementary schools. And by having this a primary grade structure and an upper elementary structure, I think we can build that opportunity in our existing spaces by shifting our grades up. But this is only going to be long-term if we can build the capacity for the 9th grade and move the 9th grade up to have a comprehensive offering at the high school. And I want everyone to understand, this talk about construction at the high school is not because of growth at the high school. It is really about the aging infrastructure at the high school. Since 2014, I know we have been on an active plan, and Mr. Giuliano, who's hosting this meeting, and the Board of Education have been the people behind the scenes. He's been the gentleman financing all of this, and we have not had a referendum. And through a variety of funding mechanisms, he has managed to air condition all of the facilities in the district that were unair conditioned, with the exception of the high school, which has some spaces that are not air conditioned. B Hall in the high school was air conditioned, but they are window air conditioners. And you notice that if you're a parent of a Bound Monroe student, those were window air conditioners as well, because they were the quickest fix to bring down the temperatures in the classroom. But all the other buildings have state-of-the-art centralized air conditioning systems, and Churchill is actually the newest building to be air conditioned before the start of this school year. Completely new roof was placed on the building and air conditioned throughout. So that's the kind of infrastructure improvements we have to make. And we've really done a good job of maintaining our existing facilities and bringing, our elementary schools up to a higher standard. At Irwin and Memorial, there are 2 multi-purpose rooms that have been renovated in there. But we do have an equity in our elementary schools. Some of the schools have a designated cafeteria gymnasium, and others are, a cafetorium. So those kinds of things we would like to look at for the future and build that capacity as more of a primary grade structure, upper elementary grade structure, middle school, high school type configuration. That's what I think is the long-term future of East Brunswick. If you're looking at the 10, the 20, the 25, the 30-year fix, and to be able to accommodate growth without having to go back to the community again and saying, we're going to have to do another referendum. We didn't do this right the first time. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question? I guess.
Yes, you did. And I mean, I think it sounds like we kind of have to see where we go in the next year or two and then go from there, looking at the numbers after 2024 with the survey results.
Right. And we would absolutely have that demographic study redone again after the pandemic, because we would need that information to be able to have really robust conversations with the community. But I think at this point, that's when we start talking about going out to the community and we start asking the community, what do you see as the future of East Brunswick Public Schools? What do you want to see in any future facility enhancements we do? If we added to Churchill to replace the temporary classroom units, what does that look like? Or what could a new high school look like? And what does that comprehensive high school look like? Or does it become a 9th grade academy with a 10, 11, 12 configuration? Those are all questions that have to be answered. And there are lots of models that we could explore. And like I said, there's a variety of variations, and the board's been involved in very robust conversations for a number of years. But we began to really look in earnest after the demographer released his report in 2019, and knowing that the clock was ticking, and then when the pandemic hit, we knew there was a pause. But the pause wasn't going to last very long, because even in spite of that, we were having parents, begin to register with anticipation of bringing their children to East Brunswick. And our office gets called all the time about parents beginning to think about moving here. And so we know it's real.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Vosky. That really does.
You're absolutely welcome. Absolutely. Thanks for your question.
My follow-up question, though, in terms of those concerns about the elementary schools, as a parent of a 2nd grader currently and a preschooler, I feel very blessed that he has a class size of 18 this year, a class size of 19 last year, where it really allows for that connection with the teacher and communication with the teacher. Right. As these numbers continue to grow, are we looking at more staffing at the elementary level, or reshuffling of staff, or just essentially is a part of these discussions with the board and the powers that be maintaining the at the forefront smaller class sizes?
Yes, the answer is yes. That has been a concern for the Board of Education and for us, and we take great care to look and forecast down to the classroom size. So we are very methodical. We meet with the elementary principals. We talk about all the spaces that they have available in their buildings. Before the pandemic, maybe all of you are not aware of this, but we moved our music and our art programs out of the classrooms, out of the dedicated classrooms. And we needed the classroom spaces, we needed the physical spaces. But this proposal to shift the 5th grade to Hammersholt, and you notice I was very careful, I didn't say Hammersholt Middle School. It's Hammersholt, and it would be the upper elementary school for 5th and 6th grade. By doing that, it gives us capacity at all the elementary schools. and allows us to grow those sections as we need them. We keep the lower class sizes, but the budgetary impact will be, we will have to hire more staff. We'll have to hire more teachers as those grade sections begin established, as students get enrolled and we create more sections. So yes, the commitment is to the lower grade levels, because we know that impact has a direct reflection on instruction, especially for primary elementary students. And as I said earlier, the supports that we know we're going to have to provide for students and their families is potentially significant. So having lower class sizes and having that ability to have that closer interaction with students and differentiate within the classroom, which our teachers already do a great job of doing, but provide a greater level of support within their classroom for a smaller number of students, we think will pay enormous intangible benefits.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Next, we have Peter De Sienna.
Hi.
Hi, good evening. I've got a couple of concerns here, and so far, I don't really like what I'm hearing, because I'm hearing a lot about demographics, but I'm not hearing much about how this is going to impact the education and the social emotional development of my children. And so here's my concern, like coming from K through 5, socially and emotionally and developmentally, they're all in a sense of innocence. When they go to the 6th grade, they're still with in your plan, it would be 5th and 6th grade. So now those 6th graders are interacting more with the 5th graders, keeping that on that lower level. Then all of a sudden the 7th graders get bumped up into the high school mentality. And I've got major concerns with it. I don't like the way that's going.
So can I ask a clarifying question? You said they get bumped up into the high school mentality. Is that because the 9th graders are there? Is that what you mean by the?
Yes.
Okay.
So we're really ramping them up into a faster pace of a.
No, that wouldn't be what we're trying to do.
I know it's not what you're trying to do, but.
No, I mean the 9th. So we had talked. I kind of alluded to, if we were to build a new high school, would it be a 9 through 12 comprehensive high school with maybe 9th grade academy? What Churchill provides us is the opportunity to compartmentalize those grades within that structure. We have the north and south sections of that building already. And there is a lot of travel between the two right now because of scheduling. Mr. Hannes, who is the principal of Churchill since January 1st of this last year, he and I have been discussing about opportunities for adding a 3rd grade, what that would look like. And he's a former high school assistant principal. So he came from East Brunswick High School down to Churchill as the new principal. He comes with a lot of experience in the logistics of moving students around. He was the person that was primarily responsible for phenomenal graduations at the Cure Arena for our students. So the idea is not to morph all these students together, to put them all together, to have them in an environment that they're uncomfortable with. Our situation is to compartmentalize them to the extent possible and to allow them to coexist within the same structure and not have a tremendous amount of interaction. There's going to be some, but I think there is an opportunity for the social and emotional well-being of our students to have them within the same structure, but distinctly different and somewhat isolated too.
Yeah, I see that hard to happen. Knowing I have one daughter who's at Churchill right now, and it's pretty crowded. I know a lot of the elective classes are at capacity, if not having to been split up and go to several other classrooms. So I know that school's tight as it is, and adding more bodies there is only going to get worse. But we're also forgetting about how we're going to get these kids to school. You're going to throw them on a bus, and unless you're going to have a 7th grade bus and then an 8th and 9th grade bus, you're still going to subject them to there, as well as passing, as well as these other things. But my other concern with that, though, is now you've also lost out on the time because Churchill's on the block schedule. Now the 7th graders have to go to an 84-minute time block for their classroom. And have you guys looked at that? Is that developmentally appropriate for these students to handle at that 7th grade level?
So I think there might be a misconception about what the block really consists of. So it's not 84 minutes of direct instruction that would be broken up into components. So there would be, it wouldn't be all instruction for the entire time. And yes, it would be the block scheduling would be applied to the 7th, 8th, and 9th graders, as well as the 10th, 11th, 12th graders in this proposal. So you're exactly right about that. But I think that there is and we're still working out the details of what that block scheduling is going to look like in terms of the actual components for the teachers. And so that's still being negotiated. So I think developmentally it's appropriate if we do it intelligently, and that's what we're committed to do.
Well, okay. And this is where I feel like it's becoming a rush to get a plan in place, and it feels like the board is just going to vote on it and it's going to happen, and we're going to have trailers out at Churchill, and then the parents are going to be held hostage to pass a bond through our tax dollars to get something built at the high school. That's where it feels like it's going to me right now. I feel like if we're running out of room at the elementary schools, add your trailers to elementary school. Let's get something in place for the high school going down the line, and this way you can keep your grade levels as is, instead of creating a system which, in your words, may or may not work, and we need to have contingency plans. So why go rush to we have to go to a contingency plan?
I get my teeth out before I get my cavities filled.
I'm sorry. If you wouldn't mind, if you're not speaking, could you mute yourself? We're getting some feedback from. Thank you. We actually did look at adding to elementary schools. I'm sorry. Thank you.
I got it.
Okay. Before the pandemic, we actually looked at adding temporary classroom units to Irwin and Warrensdorfer. They were the only elementary schools that really had enough space to put temporary classroom units on them. And it was going to be at a cost. We were going to lose playground space. We were going to lose a basketball court at Irwin because we needed to look at placing them close to the elementary schools. The security and the movement between the TCUs at an elementary school is different than it is at Churchill at that age level. So we did look at that. But when the pandemic set in, we started to look at the equity among our elementary schools, what our real root cause was. And I go back to the root cause is we're growing in elementary enrollment at all of our elementary schools. It's not just certain ones. So this became, how do we address this as an intermediate concern, which is why the proposal to move the 5th grade up and give us capacity at the elementary schools. And those temporary classroom units, creating that module that could exist in a premium, it's not a premium space, but it's a space that we can afford to have those stay there and not upset our programming in terms of athletics or anything else behind Churchill, except for those things that you talk about in the integration of 7th grade with 8th grade and 9th grade. And by the size of the building, we're confident we can ensure that the students remain compartmentalized. There would be some interaction between students. There's no doubt about that. But we could minimize that. And there's also the probability and the possibility that students could have interaction on buses too. But we do that now. We have interaction among different grades. And I think, and I didn't want to give the impression that we're trying to paint this, we're trying to put the community in a position where you have to vote on a bond referendum. What we're trying to do is tell the community that this enrollment growth is coming. If we don't do something about it, if we don't have a plan that meets the logistical, the academic, the intermediate, and the long-term needs of the district, this community will be very unhappy that we haven't taken the measures to address it when it started to come. It'll be like the wave. And once it starts to crest, then everyone's going to remain quite unhappy. And I'm simply trying to say to the community that there might be some changes from the federal government. There might be money that we had not forecasted before. And I don't have a crystal ball, but I certainly I'm watching to see that I think there might be something different in the next 3 years than we've seen in a long time in terms of putting money into infrastructure improvements. So this would be an opportunity where it's not just a cost shared by the local community. And I commit to you that we have not been an administration or a school board that has said we want to pass this off to the community as a tax increase. And in fact, if you look at our budgets in the past, we've been below the cap, the 2% cap in terms of actual total net taxes. And we've done that by being, pretty prudent about everything we do. And we've done some pretty significant improvements to our schools without asking the community for a referendum to do it. So I'm just, I'm humbly asking the community to consider this, because I think that we're looking at a longer term problem than what we just see right before us in the immediate future.
Great. Well, then I will humbly ask that you really consider the development on the children first before we start shifting grades around and then putting ourselves into a corner that now we've got mobile units on a property which don't really need to be there anymore because that's not the building that's running out of room. It's down at the elementary schools. And I think there's another way that this could be done. And I think we're rushing. It really just sounds like a rush to get something in place. And that's where I'm at. Okay. Thank you for listening.
Yes. Thanks for being here. Mr. Giuliano, you muted yourself.
Yes, I did. Next in the queue is Hong Huang.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening, Dr. Valansky, and good evening, everyone. Right. So actually, I echo a lot from what Sienna just said. Right. So I will not repeat too much what he just said. Right. But as a parent with 2 kids in elementary school, right, the plan, I think it do bring us a lot of anxiety. Right, especially seeing 5th grader going into Hammersmith, right? Because no matter how we put it, right, Hammersmith, it is a middle school, right? We build it as a middle school. It is having a middle school environment, right? So when kids from 5th grade and then suddenly jump up to the middle school environment, right? Then I think I do believe you and the teachers, they do a lot of research already, how to prepare the kids, right? But as a parent, I cannot deny that I do have a lot of anxiety, such as how they fit into that middle school environment so quickly, right? And also we are actually living in an area that there's no school bus, right, going to the Hammersmith, right? So things go into my mind, okay, how is a 5th grader walk on the road and then walk to the middle school? So those things keep giving us anxiety. So I don't know how will you to really address some concern like that?
So let me start with that we are not looking at Hammersmith as being the middle school. We are looking at changing the culture of Hammersmith to being the upper elementary school and treating those students as upper elementary students. There are a lot of models that talk about the 6th grade being an elementary grade. And yet, if you look at research nationwide, there was a movement probably in the mid-90s that continued for about a decade, that middle schools were built around a 6, 7, 8 model. There were a lot of districts that did that. But they didn't adopt a real true middle school curriculum. So what they were doing is they'd taken elementary students up to the middle school and simply, they were within the same building called the middle school, but the 6th graders really, they hadn't adopted a curriculum that was really addressing the needs of that comprehensive level of students. So we are talking about making Hammersmith the upper elementary school. And I think this would probably be, it will be an adjustment for parents to look at Hammersmith differently. But I think we have the opportunity to make it feel differently for our students and to create a 5th grade experience that's different than what they might potentially experience at their current elementary school. And that's not to say that we haven't done a great job, because we have, but there are lots of traditions and there are celebrations that happen in 5th grade because it signifies the moving from elementary school right now to the middle school. And so, but part of, like I said earlier, the transition to middle school for some students has been more difficult, and that's given some parents anxiety. So we looked at opportunities to elongate that transition. I think this could be that solution, but I think we have the opportunity to re-envision what Hammersholt looks like.
Were you able to share a bit more detail, like, you know, how you create this like upper elementary school environment, right? Or maybe like in detail, like how do you like prepare a 5th grader, right, for a upper environment? I mean, an upper elementary school environment like that.
Well, I think we involve our administrators, who are a great team of people, and you know, Dr. Gaskell does a great job now of creating like an introduction to Hammersholt. And, you know, he has experience with younger children too in his professional career. So, you know, this is about the introduction to the school. And I know the students produce their own video welcoming the new students to Hammersholt. And this is an opportunity too to reinvent that for 5th graders and to actually showcase for them, you know, what Hammersholt could look like. And I'll just give you a quick story. We had over a year ago when we opened school, and Frost Elementary School had a complete sewer backup. We had to move from the school the first day of school, and we took all the students from Frost up to Hammersholt for the day, because that was the emergency location we had for Frost if we had to shut the building. And it was interesting to talk to 5th graders when they walked into Hammersholt. They would look around and they go, do I have to go back to Frost? Can I just stay here? You know, because they were so excited about being in the new building. And I think we underestimate what our children are, or even our own children, what our children are capable of. And I think this gives us the opportunity to create the environment we can meet them where they are too, to make this transition as seamless as possible. I think the anxiety comes from the expectation that we were going to try to fit elementary students into a middle school model. And that is not the case at all. That is not the intent. And that's my commitment to you. We're not putting elementary students in a middle school model, but giving them a longer elementary experience, I think could pay dividends for us as a district and for all of our students too, especially after recovery from a pandemic.
Okay. A follow-up question is that like we have been quite focused on the high school, right? So like, will there a plan to put the 5th grade back to elementary school? Because like, if we look around like the whole country or maybe around the world, right? So a regular or normal elementary school, it is like up to 5th grade, right? So what will be the plan to put the 5th grade back to the regular elementary school?
We wouldn't put the 5th grade back in the elementary schools, because that's the premise of building the capacity at the elementary schools, is creating a primary and upper elementary configuration. So we have the room to grow where our students are coming into the district in kindergarten through 3rd grade. That's where the real growth occurs in the district. But we'd still have elementary school. There are a number of models in the state and throughout the country where they have elementary schools K-3 and 4-6. They're all elementary schools, but they are maybe housed in different sections of buildings or in separate buildings, but they break them down by pre-K to 3 and 4-6. So those models exist too. So, you know, and every district has to configure their grades based on the facilities they have. So if you look at the research, there isn't one that says this is the optimum, this is the ideal. This is really kind of representation of what a lot of models are throughout the country. Not only what we have now, but what we're proposing. I think the one anomaly that we have that a lot of districts do not have is that we have our 9th graders separated from our high school, but physically separated from the high school. Even though they go to Churchill, they are considered high school students. So But that isn't the real focus in this first phase. The real focus is to build our elementary capacity, and then to begin to see what the community's interest in this phase 2 component, and what the board's pleasure is about moving it forward. But the immediate need is about building this elementary classroom capacity so our students have this opportunity to engage with their teachers with lower class sizes, and we can meet the needs of those students in the classes too with the social and emotional and academic supports that they need.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
Next in the queue is Robin Zernitzky.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, how are you?
Okay, thanks. How are you?
Good.
So I have a couple of questions. One is, I know you keep mentioning upper elementary school, and I'm really I'm reiterating the last person's question because I don't necessarily have a feel yet what the difference is. What's an upper elementary versus an elementary? I know that in 5th and 4th grade, they change classes, right? Our students normally change classes, obviously not during COVID. In 6th and 7th, they would change for every class. That's how I understand it. So would 5th graders be jumping up to change classes for every class, or is there going to be some interim year where they're sort of more in a protected environment?
Yeah, I would look at this as a hybrid, so that we have to look, as many of you have mentioned, we are not trying to accelerate students to become more mature, to leave their elementary environment, to grow up faster. I, as a parent and as a superintendent, am really passionate about letting children experience the world around them because, the world moves pretty fast. And all of you who are parents on this call certainly know how quickly your children grow up. And when they get to be older, you realize how quickly they got to be that old. And when you turn around and look, and all of a sudden they're ready to graduate or move on to do something else. We want this experience not only for our professional capacity, for our teachers to have the ability to meet the needs of every child. We want every child to have the ability to have the best experience they can in East Brunswick Public Schools. So I look at this as 5th grade as we could make this a hybrid, and we have not sorted out all the schedules yet, but this opportunity would be something that wouldn't be as all of a sudden you're moving to 5th grade and you're changing all your classes. But the building itself lends it to compartmentalization with a house model, with the way the building was originally designed to have multiple houses within the school. So it does allow us to have the compartmentalization and to commingle students where we need to, but to keep them compartmentalized too, and give them that more intimate feel that they're used to in the elementary schools.
And I think just something to point out is, these students who are going to be 5th grade, when they're in elementary school, everything is just smaller, right? The rooms are smaller. The toilet seats are small. Everything is smaller. And when you go up to the, middle school to Hammarskjöld, which I understand you can call it Hammarskjöld or Hammarskjöld Middle School, but everything's bigger. So how are these kids supposed to be comfortable in that capacity? I guess I struggle with that. So I struggle with that. And as a result, I support what some of the other folks were saying about trying to build from the elementary school section instead, right? Is there any way to sort of revisit the possibility of, adding an elementary school into a shopping mall that has empty stores, right? Like how many of those do we have on Route 18? Is there any possibility to come up with a different way to maintain the same structure that we have? While ultimately, I'm in agreement that the high school could use a facelift. That's certainly, I don't think anyone's against that. But I think this intermediary step, there's a danger to it.
Well, you raised a good point about, why not just use an existing structure or facilities. And as an educational institution, everything that we do, everything that we use for an instructional space has to go through a pretty rigorous review process with the Department of Education. So we couldn't simply say within a 6-month period, we're going to put a facelift on empty storefronts, or take an empty big box store and turn it into a school. That it would be a major undertaking that would probably closely pace the construction of a new school. And so those are the dynamics that we have to deal with as a public school institution in the approval processes we have to go through. And we did, I think you mentioned about, if you mentioned about land, we did look at available land, and we have not come across any land that is available for purchase. And obviously that would add to the total cost of any project that we would think about undertaking. And land costs can add significantly to the cost of any school construction, because now you start talking about roadways and infrastructure that have to be installed on that vacant land. It becomes very, very expensive. So this was to meet the immediate needs of our elementary growth, to have an equitable solution across the elementary schools, and to be able to intelligently address that growth and smaller class sizes, and then begin to ask the community, along with the Board of Education, what do you think about the high school? It became a secondary question, but knowing we had to address the high school. So I don't want everybody to think that my focus has been on the high school and this was a way to get the high school addressed. That's not the case. But we do have to address the high school facility and the fact that it is continuing to age, and either we put money into it, and how much do we do and what does that look like? Or does the community and the Board of Education want to look at something else? Do they want to consider a new high school that would possibly last this community for 50 years? So that's really, where we are with that.
Okay, I just have one last comment, and I'm sort of taking this from a different angle.
Okay.
So I appreciate, this year my children have elementary school students have been able to be in school the whole year, which I've been very happy as a working parent. And I feel like we're putting a lot of effort into this situation, which I understand is definitely coming down quickly, as a problem. But I do have a separate concern that I feel like some of our immediate efforts should be towards getting the kids into school full day. And I worry that that's sort of lost focus as a result of this particular initiative.
I would like to assure you and everyone here that that is not the case. The primary focus of this year has been to return our students. And I'll be very honest, I was hoping earlier this school year that we would be in a position right now that we could have returned our students to full days of instruction. We got down toward, as we approached the end of this year, we looked at returning students 5 days a week. And we had to postpone that for a period of time. As you recall, we had a forecast to open, and then we had to push that off because we had a number of people who had contracted COVID. And it was going to be nearly impossible to even open some of our schools because we didn't have enough staff, administrative staff, to run those buildings. And so we postponed that. So lunch became the deciding factor. And it's not about, not just the safety, but CDC and the department, or the Middlesex Department of Health, even though we can go down to 3 feet of distancing in these new guidelines with students in a classroom, when they remove their mask, it requires 6 feet of distancing. That's what the recommendation is. And that's what Middlesex Department of Health advised us with extreme caution. And so to do that, and the number of staff that we would need to supervise that group of students that we spread over that space to be able to serve lunch was a problem we could not solve. We just couldn't get the manpower or women power to be able to take those positions and fill those positions to do this safely. But we are committed, and we have been planning our return in September to full days of instruction with lunch, and we're going to return to normal operations. It may be we're going to be wearing masks for a while, but that's the intent. We're coming back to school in September.
Okay, thanks for the information, and I guess I'll stop I'll stop waiting for a call that I can be really excited that my kids can go in full day. Now I understand the reality that it probably won't be till September.
Yeah, unfortunately, and we did, and I'm going to tell you, I was hoping we could. I was one of those people that was hoping we could actually pull it off, but we can't do it safely. And if you do look at, some of the situations around the state where, some smaller districts have been successful in it because they do have the smaller numbers. But we had a significant number of students who wanted to return to school 5 days a week. We're above 70% in some of our elementary schools, and we keep having requests. And so we're accommodating those students 5 days a week wherever we physically can. So we're not turning people away. But I apologize to you. We tried, and it's just not safe for this school year. But I'm anxious. I think we're all anxious to return to school the way we all knew it in September.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
Next, we have Shilpi Mahajan.
Hi, Dr. Walesky.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, I just want to latch on to the concerns that many parents have raised during this call. My son is in 3rd grade, and he's going to be the first one going to Hammersholt in 5th grade. And I don't think Hammersholt is really built as an upper elementary school. As somebody said, everything is bigger. They have to use lockers, and they have to, they're bigger. It just doesn't have a feel of the cozy elementary school. And the school culture is also very different, like how Dr. Gaskell runs the school is very different from how a Frost is run, for instance. I really have huge concerns that this is being rushed into. The next year is a year when kids actually go in full time, and you have to really have them get back to that mindset, the motivation of the kids. Academically, they all have fallen back. Their social emotional learning, their mental health. I think those should be the key concerns for next year, rather than, thinking about moving into a middle school. I'm personally very concerned about this move.
Okay. As we talked earlier, the primary focus is about the return from the pandemic and those students who have been out remote the entire year, or those who haven't been in school for the entire year and their transition back. So that is our primary focus. But the way that Hammersholt is designed is that in the house model, there is a way to compartmentalize the students and make it feel smaller within parts of the building. But the building is, there's no getting around it. It is a physically larger building. And but that's the kind of navigation that our students go through as 6th graders, and they quickly adapt to that. And I'm not trying to force students down into we're trying to get them to move, like I said, to become more mature earlier, or to move up into a middle school environment earlier. But we are faced with the buildings that we do have, and the most appropriate way that we can address this immediate need, which, as I said, we are going to be faced with overcrowded elementary classrooms. And we did look at putting temporary classrooms at a couple of the elementary schools, but this is a more equitable distribution among the elementary schools. And I think that, I know that in the 7th, 8th, 9th grade, we have the opportunity to redesign some of our curriculum to meet those needs. But our 5th and 6th graders too, I think we have the opportunity to build this new experience for our 5th graders. And I've had conversations personally with Dr. Gaskell about this opportunity, and he's ready to embrace it. So Dr. Gaskell, as the middle school principal, is ready to embrace this new approach if the board decides to endorse it.
So I'm not personally against, moving the upper elementary to middle school if you think you can do it. My daughter has been in the middle school. She's going to go to high school this year. So I'm familiar with the environment in both the schools. My concern is that you will not be able to change the school's culture too soon. You're just looking at an year to implement multiple changes. And I think it's very aggressive. I just don't have a good feeling about it. That's my only concern. I mean, I personally don't support the decision in the short term. Maybe in the long term, 2 years from here, once the pandemic has gone, I mean, and maybe we're back to some form of normalcy, we can look at it. But I think it's being done too fast. That's my only concern personally. The other concern I had was, and I think this decision has kind of been made, it's just about the board passing it, but I'm addressing my concerns so that, I mean, the school district actually looks at things like school culture, things like how they're going to address the social emotional learning, how they're going to address the mental health of the children, nothing of which I actually see right now in the curriculum. So I'm just very overwhelmed by what I'm hearing on the call today. I hear a lot of research being done on demographics changes, but I see no plan in place. So
Okay.
that's all I want to say. The other thing I
was just going to say the social and emotional supports you probably don't see because of the environment that our students are in. So it's really not so much curriculum based right now as it is we are dealing with individualized situations, and our entire staff, our nurses, our guidance counselors, our student assistance specialists, all those individuals have been actively involved in social and emotional supports for students in this really new environment that we find ourselves in this year, where some of the students haven't been back in school at all this year. So still providing those resources remotely, or providing supports to even families, not just the students. So that's been actively going on. This is and probably I do want to say that we have spent a lot of time doing this and talking about this, but it might feel rushed to the community because of the pandemic. And I must tell you that we have paid enormous attention to the pandemic. That is our first and foremost priority, but also realizing that we are going to have to address this situation that is looming upon us. And if we don't have a plan in place, I fear that when September 22 comes, we're going to be faced with dealing with higher class sizes in our elementary schools than any of us will be comfortable with, and we'll be trying to figure out a solution to that. So that was the reason for this.
I just have one more follow-up question on the block scheduling, because it's going to impact my children. Like once he gets to 7th grade, I mean, I think 8th and 9th junior high students already struggle with the block scheduling, and I'm concerned that you'll be enforcing that on 7th grade. I really don't, because I don't see that instructional difference that you're talking about on the call in an 84-minute block schedule. I mean, the kids are just being taught to with no breaks. I really don't understand how it's going to be implemented once they get into a regular classroom model. I mean, what's the plan in place for that, for 7th grade especially?
We're working on that right now, but the block scheduling, and we're still working out some other details on block scheduling. The idea for block scheduling and why this came as a proposal to the board is after many years of research about block scheduling and what benefits it could bring our students. And when you look at the actual time that a teacher has to teach within a classroom environment, once you talk about the transitions in the classroom, we're talking about, a smaller component, and then being able to elongate that and be able to have more time for the students to be able to reflect, to ask questions, to experiment with the subject matter, and to have that direction provided by one of our teachers. And so that's what we were looking at for block scheduling. But we know too that to do this in a very intelligent way, we have to have, our teachers have to be supported in that, have to be professional development. That's all been planned. So we have to make sure that we have all those details worked out in terms of the support for our teachers, for all the staff, and the administrative teams that are going to schedule these components. But we think, we wouldn't have recommended this to the board This was a significant change, and we thought that it would benefit the students of East Brunswick Public Schools. It wasn't brand new to it wasn't brand new, but it's brand new to East Brunswick. Other districts have similar models, and teams of people from East Brunswick, including Dr. Mella and members of the high school and other members of the administration, visited multiple sites to look at their programs and their plans. So our model is built around established success stories.
Okay, I mean, my only request is just hold it off for another year and then, look at moving the grades that you're thinking, because I think this is too rushed for the kids and for the teachers too.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Next is Sari Hitchens.
Good evening, Dr. Valesky. Hi, everyone.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thanks for listening to all of us tonight. And I'm not going to echo what everyone else said, other than to say it does feel very, very rushed. I have a third grader and a fifth grader, two obvious grades that will be completely and totally impacted the most by this change. My fifth grader was in tears when she heard about it. Both of my kids just went back to school this marking period. And frankly, I had said to my fifth grader, if you were in fourth grade, you wouldn't be going back, because fifth grade was so important to her. These fifth graders especially would be impacted by this move, not only this year, but the next 2 years. This year, they've already been upended. They haven't had a fifth grade. They didn't even have a full fourth grade. They're then going to come sixth graders for 1 year at a school that frankly they've been looking forward to going to as sixth graders, and spending those 2 full years there. That's what my daughter's been dreaming about. That's what they've heard their friends talk about. They've been excited to do that. And then they'll spend 1 year there in a year that, as everyone has said, post-pandemic, that is really that year of adjustment. They'll just get comfortable there before they're forced into another totally new environment with an earlier start time, a different kind of schedule, and really throwing them for a loop. So now that's their third year in a row that they're getting thrown. And then they might even be at a high school that's completely under construction that, as you alluded to before, that they won't even benefit from. They won't even get to experience the luxury of having a new school or a renovated school or whatever the plan is. So those fifth graders are really, and I'll echo everyone with my plea to delay this at least a year. I understand the need for improvements to the schools. I understand the need for the crowding. I understand the reasoning, and I know that it needs to be done. But this is not the time post-pandemic. Look, we could all be in lockdown in September. We love the idea of going back to normal. We love the idea of going back to, maybe even just life with masks. But reality is there are variants. There are things that are going on. There are people who won't get vaccinated, that to each their own. But we might have to shut down again. We might have to go virtual again. We don't know. So to put a plan in place now, when you don't even know what school is going to look like in September, we can be hopeful, we can be optimistic. It's so rushed. And I know you said it's not rushed to the board. Discussions have been had. If it doesn't feel, it's not rushed, feels rushed to the community, but isn't the community what's the most important here? The community, our children, are the most important here. And if it feels rushed to the community, then it's got to feel rushed to our kids. Our kids are just going to be pushed and pushed and pushed. And again, I know I'm saying it because these are my kids that are affected, I think any parent might feel that way. But once we're in our new normal, it's the pandemic, these kids and how they've just already been through so much. And you know what, I've heard we've heard from a lot of third grade parents on this call. My concern is for my fifth grader almost more than my third grader. My third grader will almost have that, yes, she'll be rushed out of elementary school. She's tiny. She's amongst the youngest of her grade. So she'll be a fifth grader in this environment. I am getting to a question, I promise. But I guess if the community is feeling rushed, shouldn't this plan just be put on hold? And my part two of my question is actually, if there's no, it doesn't really sound like there's a formal phase 2 plan in place. So how can you make a decision on phase 1 without knowing what phase 2 is, and also not having the confidence that the entire town, those over 65, those who don't have children, are going to pass a referendum for a high school in a phase 2? Like, how do we move to phase 1 without knowing what phase 2 is, I guess is what I'm saying.
Your question is actually a very good question. I'm glad you asked it, because the design of phase 1 in this plan had to be legitimately durable. And I use the term durable. So if for example, phase 2, if the community said, we are not interested in a new high school, we are not interested in pursuing anything with a high school, go ahead and just start putting money into fixing whatever you need to fix, but that's the building we're going to have for the next decade. Then we also have to have that plan to address the elementary school growth. And so phase 1 would really become a much smaller component, in that we would have to replace the temporary classroom units with some kind of addition to Churchill, a physical addition to Churchill, where we do have the space to do that, and replace those temporary classroom units within, we believe that by 5 years, we'll have to have them replaced or have a waiver from the state. So they aren't going to be there for this longer period of time. But we wanted to have a phase 2 or phase 1 that could exist on its own if phase 2 never happened. And, you know, am I confident that East Brunswick community would support a referendum? I think that goes to the presentation to the community, how it's planned and how it's presented. And we would certainly have to have community stakeholders. And I say this to all of you, if you are passionate enough, and thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for all your questions, and thank you for all your insight, and thank you for all your feedback. But if we go to that next phase, we're going to need that support from the community. We're going to need a core group of stakeholders that will be part of the voice to be able to sell whatever it is that package is to the broader community. And it's about convincing people that this investment in education doesn't have to be directly tied to what your children benefit from. If you live in East Brunswick, do you care about your community? Do you want to see this investment in a facility that legitimately will last 50 years? Because that's how long the existing high school has lasted. And so you're talking about a reinvestment in the community for generations to come. And if you never had a child, I'm sorry. If you're not speaking, could you, thank you. That the investment in this kind of, investment in the schools would pay dividends to all the residents of the community, whether you have children or not. And it might be your grandchildren that go to these schools, or it might be a niece or a nephew, that goes to those schools. But this really is about building the future of East Brunswick. But that phase 2 has to kind of stand on its own, and phase 1 has to be able to exist if phase 2 doesn't get acted on right away, or if the community says we're not interested. I mean, that's a possibility, and that's why we built it the way we did.
No, I understand that. I mean, like I said, the plan makes sense. It really does. But going back to our children and echoing what so many others have already said tonight, is if it feels rushed to the community, it may have been in the conversations in a boardroom, but it was not expressed to the community before, 3-4 weeks ago. So to us, yes, it does feel rushed, and it feels rushed for our children coming off, kids that have experienced loss in their families, loss of their friends, loss of life, loss of time, loss of innocence, and to rush these kids and truly the 5th and the 3rd graders are among the most impacted, and they're so young right now, and they're so impacted by this. And tears at night, a year ago, of what is going to happen to me, what is going to happen to my grandparents, for all of these kids to then just have their world shook up and shuttled from grade to grade, from school to school. It seems rushed, and it seems just unfair to them and not beneficial in any way to their social, emotional, or academic well-being. Again, my kids have been virtual until April 19th. I'm very fortunate that they were very good in doing what they needed to do, but I know there are kids who didn't even log on to the computers, not just in our district, but around the country. And it really seems like this is not the time to do this. And I would appreciate the board's consideration in pushing it off a year and, letting our kids have this full year of readjustment back into school life. My kids haven't had homework. My kids have not had homework in a year and a half. None. How do they balance learning again how to do homework with their extracurriculars and their clubs when at even from 5th grade to 6th grade? That's a big jump on a normal year, let alone post-pandemic year. And then to have those 6th graders move to Churchill with an entirely different schedule and environment, without that small house feeling that they get at Hammersholt. It's just a lot on our children. And I will leave it with that. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. I just wish that, I just hope that the board listens to the community in thinking that this put it off a year.
Thank you for your feedback, and thanks for being here.
Next.
Mr. Juliana, it's 9:06. How many other people do we have in the queue?
We have 6 people in the queue.
Okay. I'd like to entertain those 6 if we could, if it's agreeable.
Yep.
Okay.
Do that. Kim Valdata.
Good evening.
Hi.
I guess let me start by saying I currently work over at Churchill, and I have a 5th grader over at Irwin who has her own question. Let me start with that one. It's an easy one. She'd like to know, should this proposal move forward at Hammersholt with 5th and 6th grade, would the house system be maintained?
Yes.
Okay, nice easy one. My questions kind of relate more to Churchill. We've spoken.
Your questions get harder, right, Kim? All right.
There's been a lot of discussion about the elementary school level, and I'll speak to all 3rd grade parents out there. There's a big difference between 3rd graders and 5th graders, and I'll have to agree with Dr. Valesky on the note that a lot of our 5th graders they'll do wonderfully at a Hammersholt, in a Hammersholt setting. My concern, though, is this 3 grade levels at Churchill, where currently we have 2 grades, our 8th and 9th, filling our school. And I understand 32 temporary classroom units are being constructed. Will these classroom units, you can't tell much from the images, will they contain extra art rooms, music rooms? Will there be, and are they strictly classroom locations? Are these rooms with sinks? Because unlike in our elementary school where we have, our math classes and English classes can be taught in a standard room.
Right.
A lot of our classes at Churchill become much more specialized and have materials and equipment that is then necessary. So are these TCUs straight up classroom spaces, or are they more specialized?
Well, so what you see as representation right now is just a really, a block of space. And we'll have to look at what the opportunities are to build specialization into those. I think I mentioned earlier that the science labs are one of the things that, we certainly can't, but I certainly understand. And in talking about, Kim, your area of specialization, when you're talking about art rooms and things like that, you're going to need certain pieces of equipment there. You're going to need a certain amount of space. So this is the footprint, but the actual classroom design within that structure for specific classrooms hasn't been formalized yet, because we would want to meet with, teachers, with representatives from the school, to determine what that would look like. And again, as I mentioned, it's going to be a temporary structure, but it will not feel temporary in the fact that it does exist for probably 5 years. So we want to make it as accommodating as we can, and to meet the needs of the district. I began having conversations with Mr. Hannes, after we had talked about this at the board level, and we were going to go to the public and give this presentation. So he's actively thinking about what this could look like in terms of how do we incorporate a new grade level at Churchill with the temporary classroom units in the back of the building. How do we do this with security? How do we do lunch? How do we do the transitions of students within the building and still keep those students somewhat isolated and identifiable as 7th graders, 8th graders, and 9th graders? So those are what the planning phase would be for this next year, and that's what this next year is meant to give us, to formalize all that, so we could have those temporary classroom units designed and in place by August of 2022.
Okay, so you keep talking about this compartmentalization, but that's going to be near impossible if any student, whether it's a 7th grade wing at the TCUs or a 9th grade wing, they're still exiting for, I'll take lunch, for example. We are in this move to block scheduling, losing a lunch period. With 2 grades, we will be crowded. Now with 3 grades, will there be a new lunchroom? Will there be an all-purpose area for them to eat in?
Yeah, we're exploring to be able to expand the footprint for where lunch is served in the school. And that's one option we're looking at right now. And we have some options to consider there. And there's no doubt, and you mentioned it, there's going to be, I can't guarantee the 7th graders won't see the 8th graders, won't see the 9th graders. But to the extent that we can through scheduling, we would try to optimize, keeping them within their select peer groups for as long as we can. But there are going to be transitions, as you well know, in the school, where the students are going to interact with each other. Come on, Val. I'm sorry, we have somebody else. I'm sorry. Did you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So that we have those opportunities, but I think we have a opportunity to sit down and discuss how we can do this and do it the best way possible.
Okay. And is there intention for our phys ed classes? Now, I'm picturing, some of our 9th graders tower above me. I'm picturing a 7th grader in the locker room changing next to a 9th grader for phys ed class. Is that something that? Yeah,
we're trying to keep those kinds of things separated. So because we know of the social, the maturity and
physical.
Yeah, it's physical too. You see that too, the typical, as I mentioned earlier, in even a 6, 7, 8 middle school configuration, the 6th graders, by the time they become 8th graders, they seem like they've grown a foot sometimes.
Yes. And then I suppose I have one more question. I think just one. It's late. Parking.
Yes.
We are pretty tight as it is. Will we be building new parking lots?
We will have to have some kind of temporary parking structure in the back of the building, probably. That's probably a consideration we'll have to look at.
That's it. That's all I got for you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay, next is Tony Tang.
Hi, Mr. Volaski. I have 2 questions. The one is, all students requires to come in person to school at upcoming for September?
Yes.
The question 2 is, even though they don't have a vaccine for COVID-19.
I'm sorry, could you repeat your second question? Even though they what?
Even they don't have the vaccine for COVID-19.
Correct. No, and this is, I'm telling you what we're being told by the governor and the Department of Education, that there are not going to be considerations for remote learning in September of 2021, that we will all be back. I am hearing that Pfizer is asking for emergency use to be able to administer their vaccine to students 12 and older. I'm not endorsing a vaccine, by the way. I'm just sharing the information. The governor has not given any provision for any remote learning at this point. We're being told by the Department of Education to expect to come back to work, back to school in September under normal conditions. But as I mentioned, we will probably have to continue to wear masks for a while, and we will continue our safe protocols throughout the day in terms of cleaning, which we've already done and we continue to do. Yeah, that's the direction we're being told by the state.
Okay. Next, we have Yelena Osores.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having this forum and for listening to everybody, even past 9 o'clock. My kids are in pre-K and in second grade, so I really just came here to listen and to learn more and hear everybody's opinions and what you had to say. I did think I heard you say to a parent that that the lines for the elementary schools may be redrawn, and people who are on the edges of those lines may have their elementary schools changed. Is that true? Is my child possibly going to be ripped out of their elementary school and switched to a different one?
No. So what we would do is we would identify the attendance areas. We've already kind of identified those and looking at how we could over time make that transition. So one of the approaches would be to grandfather the students that are already in school, and as new students come into the school, then if you're in a certain enrollment area, you'd be assigned to your new school. Already with this plan, we're talking about, I've heard very clearly from parents about the transition and about the disruption in terms of the pandemic. The last thing we want to do is to say, okay, 1 year, like we just changed, you live across the street, you go to this school, the person across the street goes to a different school. We're trying to correct these anomalies that have existed for years, and this might be an opportunity to do that. But for this group of children, we would have the opportunity to do this soft transition and to be able to do this over periods of time. So you wouldn't be removed from your school, you continue to go there, and then the new students enrolled would be aligned with that school.
Got it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Sorry about that. Next, we have Max Caponegro. Mr. Caponegro?
Yes, we're right here.
Hi.
Sorry about that. Hey, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good. So I have a question about Churchill. Since kids will be coming in 7th grade,
yes.
Will the sports programs be expanded as a result of having 7th graders with 8th graders?
We are looking at that, yes, to see what opportunities we could offer our 7th graders.
Okay.
All right.
Is that it?
Yep, I think that was it.
Okay.
Okay, next we have Nathan Gibson.
Hello, how you doing today?
Hey, how are you?
All right, I'm doing well. Thanks for fielding messages after hours. One, I just have a couple questions. One, we know that social emotional learning is like key in this day and age right now, given the pandemic. And with the toll being taken on students with anxiety, a higher level of depression and mental health, is there a plan to introduce any extra assistance? And if so, what does that look like?
Actually, there is. And we actually began this process before the pandemic, and thank you for asking that question. We engaged with a company called Effective School Solutions. And actually, Dr. Figueroa made a presentation at the Board of Education at the last meeting. And it was basically a report card of where we were with the work that we're doing with them to identify, inclusion, multicultural inclusion in our schools. but we are still doing a variety of work with social emotional support behind the scenes and getting ready as we return in September to ramp that up as we get ready back in schools. So that's been a singular focus, and we got ahead of it and knew this was an issue even before the pandemic. But the pandemic, as you mentioned, has accelerated this and has really amplified some of those situations. So I think we are well positioned. The board was very supportive and very proactive about making that a budget priority. And I think that we have those supports in place, and we'll continue to put resources and personnel and money into those programs to make sure that we meet the needs of those students. And and as we see that unroll this beginning of this next school year, we remain flexible and adaptable to meet whatever needs come our way, so we can make sure that our students are poised for success as they re-enter schools this next year.
Okay. Just to follow up to that, Effective School Solutions is good. I work with that at my school. I'm also an assistant principal.
Okay.
One of the things that I am asking, that's a program
Right.
with the addition of new students coming into the building and the influx of more students. As a district, are we looking at bringing in more social workers, counselors to deal with just overall mental health in the building?
We've expanded our counseling departments, and we did that a number of years ago. And I know some of our counselors are online here tonight, and they do a phenomenal job with our students. But we're going to be putting our students in touch with resources and through Effective School Solutions to deal with that social, emotional, and mental health component. And we are poised this year to put more resources in our budget toward that for the 21-22 school year.
Okay. And then the last question, not follow-up. I did hear you say that you're looking at trying to make sure that things are compartmentalized, but then I also heard you say that the students still have to move with everyone for part of the day for different sections and things of that sort. How is that going to be accomplished with gym extracurricular activities to give the younger kids that's smaller the same opportunities that they would have had at the elementary school or at the middle school?
Yeah,
so that they'll be able to compete. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
so
that's
that they'll
okay.
still be able to compete.
That's okay. I think you mean in terms of competing in terms of PE athletic type things, or?
Correct.
Okay. We're going to look at scheduling, and it's going to be part of this is a logistical, puzzle in terms of figuring out the schedule and movement of students. And as an administrator that, scheduling is a huge component of any building. It can be very complex. But I think, that this comes down to the culture too of the staff. And I'm very proud of our Churchill staff and what they've accomplished. And I think that we have the ability to create a very successful new model under Mr. Hannes's leadership. And I think we'll provide the opportunities for students that parents a year after it's implemented will be very pleased with and very excited about for their students. And I think that we are blessed with a really great security team. So when it comes to movement around the building, we're not just talking about our certificated staff that's actually monitoring students in the building. We have a number of security professionals who have really worked hard to build relationships with students, and they're phenomenal. They help the building run smoothly. They know the students. They watch over them. They're protective of them, and they are an integral part of how our buildings operate and transitions today through East Brunswick Public Schools, and I'm really proud of that.
So once again, thank you for even fielding questions after hours. And I do know that once you go to the board, the decision is basically already met. They're just looking over it to make sure there's no major kinks in the system. But would there be any plans in the future to make sure you incorporate more parents in the process so that we'll be able to have firsthand knowledge instead of waiting until it's like basically, hey, it's coming at you and this is happening next year type things?
Well, our plan is to really involve the community from this point on, to start having forums at different schools and to be able to talk about what this process looks like and to be able to answer any subsequent questions from parents. This is not, I don't want parents to look at tonight as a once and done. This is the beginning of a new communication. And all of you know from living in East Brunswick that, we started the pandemic and I was communicating with you at least twice a week and sometimes more than that. I know I was communicating a lot because people were complaining they got tired of hearing my voice. So now we're down to about once a week, but the plan is throughout this next school year is to be able to create forums at schools and to be able to talk to parents about these specific components as we talk about implementing. If the board moves this process forward, then that will be the next phase is to involve parents and community and to begin these really these interactive conversations and continue them just like we did tonight to answer questions and talk about the what the plan forward is and how we get to that next step.
Okay, thank you.
You're certainly welcome. Thanks for being here.
And we have Melissa Smith.
Oh, good evening. I just had two things. Is you said there's no space available for new school, right? But did you look into adding up, like adding like on the existing schools? Can you add a second floor?
We did. And, they that again would be multiple components around at multiple schools, but it doesn't result in the kind of space that we are going to need over the longer haul. It becomes more of a 5 to 10 year fix, and then you're back to having the same problem again.
Yeah, because I know I lived in North Jersey, and like when I went to school, it was K-8, and our building was 3 floors high, like 3 floors high. I noticed the ones in East Brunswick are generally flat; they're only 1 floor.
Yeah, we actually had the architects draw up. This was Mr. Giuliano. You remember how many years ago we had the architects draw up plans for multiple story additions to the elementary schools? Was it 3 years ago? Or 2?
Well, we had that examined I think it was several years ago. However, the issue with many of the elementary schools is that they were not built to be able to sustain a second floor.
Right.
So there are foundational issues on most of the, if not all the elementary schools that are single-story schools.
And where we looked at building these modular components that were multiple stories and tucking them into corners of schools. But then once you start talking about the elevator components and those kinds of things, the actual number of classrooms that you get, and we looked at, our forecast out in the beginning to trend out where we were, it would have been, in the community's eyes, a 10-year short-term solution. And then you'd have been back, we're overcrowded again. So what we're presenting to the board, we think is the beginning phase 1 and phase 2 are the longer phases that will sustain East Brunswick through its next iteration. And honestly, if you build a new building or modify or renovate the existing high school, we are talking about a building that would have a sustainable life if it's well maintained for 50 years.
So now the high school, it's not going to become an issue a couple of years from now, saying it's still not going to, we're going to need more space for the high school. No. So all these kids are going to eventually go up.
Yes. No, if we were to address the high school, we would not have a high school issue. Some of the features that with new building technology and energy efficiency, we've looked at that in terms of what the high school could look like. It could be a smaller footprint. It could be, as you mentioned, it could be more stories. It could be, designed around our program, our existing program, which would be phenomenal because our curriculum has changed a lot since that building was originally constructed and renovated and added to.
Because I know East Brunswick was originally, the high school was only 1 floor, and then they added that second floor.
Yeah, and it was a California campus where you actually went outside to change classes at one time. And we have board members that recall going to school during that time. And, we're alum here at East Brunswick, so they recall it well. But no, I think that really becomes the secondary question. This phase 2 question is about community support for that and what the board would like to do at that next phase. So those are decisions to be made yet, but those are opportunities that we can, certainly investigate.
And then my second question was, I missed the very, very beginning. So I just want to know with these trailers, how about the safety and is there bathrooms? That's the only two really, like the safety. Is there going to be the safety? Like I feel very secure when they're inside of a building, but when they're in a trailer, how secure are they in that trailer? And are they going to be moving from classroom to classroom, like from the trailer to another trailer?
Well, actually, they are, I don't use the term trailer, they're modular units, but they attach together. And so what they do is, think of it not so much as a trailer. If you could, have you ever seen a house that was constructed in a factory?
No.
So they're actually builders that actually take and build components of really impressive homes. And they build them inside under controlled conditions and they move them to the site and they assemble them. So when it's all done, it looks like a stick-built house that was built from the foundation up. These are modules that are tied together, would have an internal classroom. So once they're in this module, the students would have their own hallway, this connected hallway that would go around to the classrooms. And yes, they would have their own restroom facilities for male and female.
Okay. Okay. And then what about the security?
Security would be deployed there just like with the regular schools. And these units would have to meet all the safety standards established under the code of the township, under the building code. And they are built under the national codes for safety and security. So they'd be tied into our security system, fire alarm system. They'd be set on, foundational piers. They'd be anchored to the ground. They wouldn't look like they were movable at all. And so once they're done, they would look like a permanent structure. But they would. So
now, would you have security though in the building like you do in the high school and in the grad?
Yeah.
Okay.
We would have security deployed there, just like we do in our regular school. So that becomes an extension of the school, and our security team would monitor and oversee that as well.
Okay. Thank you for answering my questions.
You're welcome.
And have a great night.
You too. Mr. Giuliano, do we have anybody else?
We're done.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming tonight. I really appreciate the feedback, the input, and taking the time tonight to share your opinions. I know the Board of Education appreciates it too. And, they'll be listening to your comments before the board meeting this coming Thursday. So have a great night, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon.
And just one reminder for all, you may submit additional questions on the district website. On the main page, there is a section entitled Restructuring Plan, and you could submit questions there which will be added to the Q&A.
Thank you, Mr. Giuliano. Have a great night, everyone.